I think we need to rethink of how we do talent. I think we're still stuck, and we're going to feel the pain. We're still stuck in the old way of recruiting, which is like, the resume scanning and making sure they tick all the boxes. I think we need to start shifting more and more towards recruiting for the person, like the holistic approach to recruiting, understanding what they bring to the table. I think unless we start investing in our young people, we're going to have a big talent gap. How do you find a balance? Because business needs to get done. Like, that's how a company grows. You need to make money so you can pay your people. But at the same time, how can you be proactive, and what many steps you can take to create opportunities for young staff that are coming in, to give them space to develop?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Recruiting Revolution. Our guest today is Elena Agiragivoma from Washington, United States. Elena is the Director of Talent Acquisition and Development at Horizon Industries Limited and a co-founder of Bloomyouth, a tech education platform for future-ready youth. Elena is a seasoned TEDx speaker with 12 years of experience delivering sessions in over 15 countries and on leadership and soft skill development. She's also an accomplished author of 2 books and the host of the podcast Shift with Elena Agar. Welcome, Elena, and thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Nice to be here, Nadine.
To begin with, can you just help us all out about your amazing journey so far?
Sure. I'll try to keep it as short as possible. I started my career in higher education. Actually, I've spent several years working in higher education institutions and really kind of just taking on different roles within the university campuses, and then ultimately going to work to business schools, working with a more experienced, mature population of professionals who are pursuing their education, but already working full time. And there I realized that I really enjoy working with that manager level kind of experienced professionals. And so I decided to shift towards corporates. And so that's what I did. And I shifted towards talent development because all I ever knew was I enjoy working with people. I feel like higher education was amazing, but it was a little bit slow moving. And so it was natural transition to go into corporations under a talent development role, and then naturally kind of again going towards talent acquisition, because it's, talent development starts with the people that you bring on board, right? So that's what I did. I always say for me, it was a hobby that turned into a career and a business. So I do my own, of course, coaching and consulting as well. And as you've mentioned, running podcasts, writing about it. So I'm very passionate about the things that I do.
That is amazing. Also, your platform, Bloomyouth, so, which actually help the student get right skills and mindset to thrive in the future of work. What made you start that platform?
Yeah, so it started about 6 years ago, I guess. I started just really, after I left the higher education space, I have started to miss it a little bit. I didn't want to go back to it as full time, but I really missed working with students and youth. So I would always go back and deliver different sessions to universities and schools and talking with parents and so on. It was it was something I really enjoyed doing. And also in the corporate world, I realized there's a big gap between university students that are graduating with whatever degree they have, and then those coming into the corporate space. So the gap there was the soft skills, the kind of some aspects of professionalism, and just knowing how to move away from being a consumer, which is what you are in a university. You just consume information and you just execute because people are usually telling you this is what you need to do in order to pass this class, and this is where you're going to go next. And then when they transition into the corporate space, you have to become a creator, you have to become a builder. And so I realized there's this gap, and so this is when I decided, I was like, well, there has to be something to be done. So I've created kind of more formally Bloomyouth, and just continue to expand on my work with universities and schools. And in particular, as I moved back to the States, I've shifted focus towards working with kids from low socioeconomic communities because I feel like they need support just as much as everybody else, if not more, right? And so, and also foster care systems is something that I focus on as well. Kids that are, ages 16 plus that are leaving the foster care system and, going into the world of work. So making sure that they have support. And I have a group of over 12 mentors that work with me on these initiatives.
Got it. Do you think that hiring managers, as you mentioned, the soft skills, so majorly in the MNC and corporate life, the hiring managers does not really put enough emphasis on the soft skills. Rather, they just look out for the majorly the technical stuff, or the major that they are applying for, rather than the soft skills. So, do you think like this has to change?
Yeah, so it's a good point. I struggle with that one sometimes, partially because the recruiter slash talent development person in me knows that it's beyond just the tech skills, because tech skills are easier to teach. And so I look for potential, right? Like that's what we train like our recruiters to, like, look for potential, look at the whole person, not just the skill set. But I also understand on the flip side, the mindset of a hiring manager, because we live in a world, especially like I'm in tech, we live in a world that's very fast paced. And sometimes we don't have the luxury to be able to invest in the young people to help them, get those right tech skills. So sometimes you'll sacrifice everything else to make sure that they can hit the ground when they join the company. So that's a challenge, because like one of it is like, yes, you want to be proactive and you want to hire talent based on potential talent, and you want to give them the space to grow. But at the same time, you're like, but I really need somebody to hit the ground running. I need them to do the job, and so on. So depending on the size of the company, right? Like smaller companies maybe have less limitations there, because they really need somebody who just gets the job done, right? Like they have a project that needs to be done. They can't always allow themselves, 3 to 6 months to spend on development of that individual. But eventually, to your point, like they do suffer the consequence, because at some point, that young talent that might have been great at tech skills is going to hit their ceiling, because they didn't have either any interest in leadership development, any interest in client management, any interest in going beyond, or even abilities to go beyond that technical level that they're at. So there's it's pros and cons. I think it's just like for companies, how do you find a balance? Because business needs to get done. Like that's how a company grows. You need to make money so you can pay your people. But at the same time, how can you be proactive, and what many steps you can take to create opportunities for young staff that are coming in, to give them space to develop, right? So, to have that bench, so to say, that you can invest in while other people are kind of just hitting that ground running. So it's a tough one, because I've been kind of on both sides, and like, so I get the necessity of like, I need somebody now, I need them to do the job, but I also see it's a short-term solution.
Yeah, understood. Also, when we talk about career development, so for the students who are embarking on their career journey, like what advice can you offer for them, like in the early stages of career development?
Experience. What I mean by that is finding any way you can get any experience doing anything as early as possible. I myself, my first job was Subway. I used to make sandwiches, and so I used to work at Subway at 15. And then I've held all sorts of different roles. Like I was waitressing, I was cleaning houses, you name it, I've done it. And I cannot tell you how much that teaches you so many different things that a lot of the youth lack today, which is resilience, knowing your hidden talent, so to say, understanding how to earn a dollar, understanding the dynamics of teams, understanding how business operates, understanding how to deal with customers and all those things like sales. All of these skills are the base of everything that you're going to be doing in a cushy corporate environment. And the earlier you can get exposed to those things, the better it is. Of course, in different countries have different regulations around young people working, right? Like it's not always available. And you have cultural things as well. So there's a lot of reasons of why youth don't work at a younger age. So like at these kind of places, right? But then maybe you say, maybe you want to work on a side project. Maybe you want to volunteer. Maybe you want to shadow somebody. So there's so many different ways to get that experience. It's just putting yourself out there, not just studying. Studying is wonderful, great. But if you put in all of your efforts into studying and not actually experiencing, like being immersed in the world of work. So again, whether it's through shadowing, whether it's through working, it doesn't have to be a career job, just any job, because any job will teach you the basics of, again, dealing with people, different levels of people, basic psychology, basic sales, all those things. I think that is essential. That is number one. Number two, of course, is just creating space for continuous learning, right? So yes, you're learning in school, but outside of the school materials, what else is there that you're curious about? So, literally like going through like an audit of like all the things I'm curious about, right? Like to experiment with. So let's say you're not sure where you want to work post graduation. You might be studying a degree in engineering, but you're like, I don't really like it. I'm just going to finish it, and that's what most people do, right? And then they go to work somewhere else. So really exploring your curiosities and trying to identify what else can you learn about this particular field you're interested in. Who can you talk to? So almost creating this network of people that are already in fields you're interested in. Because not only are those people going to give you information that otherwise you wouldn't know, but they're also your networks to get those internships and to get those opportunities post-university. So just to summarize, like two things: experience, doesn't matter what it is, just any experience is really great for personal and ultimately professional development long-term. And then networking and building relationships with people.
That is great. When we talk about building relationships and the career development, so, in the pandemic, we have seen like the whole dynamic has changed of work. When we talk about the workplace, actually. So, do you think that career development is even more important in this time than it was then, or it's the same?
You mean in terms of the fact that we don't see each other anymore, like in person as much as we used to, or?
Considering anything like remote networking, competitive job market in terms of that.
Yeah. So, two things, like for younger people, go to the office. If your company has an option to be in an office and meet anybody in an office once a week, twice a week, once a month, whatever it is, take advantage of it. And this is so detrimental to your career starting off if you don't. I'm talking about fresh graduates. You've never been in a workplace before. You never had a job. You have to put yourself out there and you have to go to the office. You have to understand office politics. You have to mingle with your colleagues, etc. Learn from each other. You are setting yourself back years if you don't do that. I'm a huge believer in that. I've seen this impact firsthand. Not only that, but also for young people. Again, we don't know what we don't know. Mentorship is, you can't get that. There's certain things you cannot learn online. You just can't. You actually physically have to be in an environment where there's teamwork, where there's working with coworkers, understand how dynamics work, conflict, all of that. All of that is essential, period. Like, again, young people coming out of college, absolutely make time. Or if you're like, well, my company's remote, find people that live nearby, organize happy hours, organize activities, whatever it may be. Find ways to connect with your colleagues or just people working maybe in co-working space. Be around people. And one of the other challenges we see with young people in particular, Nidhi, is the aspect of loneliness, right? When you're graduating from college, this is your social time to meet people. This is where most people meet their partners, like their significant others moving forward, like depending on which culture you're in, right? Like maybe in India and Middle East, like setup is different. In US, in Western world, this is where most people meet their significant others, is, either in college or in the workplace, like ultimately. So being around people is beyond just your professional growth. It's your personal growth, which ultimately impacts your professional growth, right? Like who we marry is probably one of the most important decisions you can make, and who we spend our time with. And so it's very, very important for young people to put themselves in situations where they're meeting other people and socializing and not, being cocooned in their own space, no matter how comfortable it is or how nice it is to sit in sweatpants all day, which I do, and I love it. But, I force myself to be out there as well. So, and I would say this is true for everybody, at all levels. But of course, the more senior you are, you already had that experience. Maybe it's just about managing the team. And yes, it's important to see your team in person, but it's less detrimental to the career potentially than it is for the young people. So that's one. Career development, to answer your questions further, has been important all the time. I think now the world is starting to realize that it's so competitive, and with the growth of technology and with the competitiveness of a talent coming out. So, for example, now you don't have to have a 4-year degree to be a competitive candidate. Now you can have great certifications, you can have great experience in particular technology, and you will get the job, right? So again, depends on the companies and so on, but you have a lot of opportunity versus in the past. It's like, well, you have to have a 4-year degree, maybe a master's. So that is changing. So you have more competition coming into the workplace than before, right? So your competition pool is almost like expanding. And on top of that, you're also competing with technology. So you need to not only compete with humans, but also what technology is coming out in your field that is going to impact the way you work, that is going to impact your role, that's going to impact your industry. And being proactive, and also, and obviously we can't predict the future, but trying to figure out, being in tune with what's happening in the industry that can potentially impact your career. I think that's super important. And so I think proactiveness and continuous learning and curiosity is essential for anybody today.
Yeah, that is so true. Also, you placed a great importance on the role of, mentorship and career coaches. So in your perspective, how soon someone should have one, and why should they have one?
You should have one as soon as possible. So especially, again, for students, first in universities, for example, or even any apprenticeship programs or internships. It could be your professors, it could be your other colleagues, it could be people that you're working with, your bosses, etc. You can have multiple mentors, you can have multiple coaches, you can, and so on. There's a misconception that mentors and coaches have to be an expense, right? Like it's an investment, and it doesn't have to be. There's a lot of ways you can get free coaching. Mentorship is a free thing unless you're paying for like a mentorship program, which you don't need to do. So the earlier you start, again, the more you'll be equipped to not only know how to find those mentors in the future, and not only know how to network with those mentors and recognize opportunities for mentorship, but it will also help you significantly in your professional growth. A lot of people start looking for mentors at like that mid-level of their careers, right? Or like senior. And it becomes a little bit awkward. And people are like, I don't know how to approach it and so on. When you're younger, a lot of things are just easier. So the more you can start building those relationships from the beginning, the better it is. There are on university campuses, of course, there are mentorship programs, career services that are available, various sessions that career departments do, professors you can talk to, they can recommend you to talk to somebody and so on. In companies, there are also coaching and mentorship things in place. On LinkedIn, that's a great platform to meet people, to connect with people. There are a number of other social networks like Lunch Club, for example, where you can meet people. All of these are free tools for us to use to meet people, right? You can use you can experiment with like what to send somebody, right? Like, I can spend a whole hour talking about just on the how to find a mentor and like what do you say, how do you reach out? But we won't do that here. But so there's different ways. There's a lot of opportunities to find those mentors, and I recommend as soon as possible, as early as possible, and you can have multiple, and you have them throughout your career and life, depending on where you are, what you're trying to accomplish, and they're going to shift and they're going to kind of change over time. But it's essential. And the final thing I'll mention is we don't know what we don't know, and it's good to have somebody who's a soundboard. As a mentor, to have somebody who has been there, who's gone through the pathway that you're interested in, that's they can open doors for you. To have a coach who can act just as a soundboard for you to speak openly with somebody in a safe space is essential for us, because we, myself personally, I process information by speaking. I can't just process information by like thinking to myself. And a lot of people are like that. So the more we speak certain thoughts, the more we say, okay, well, like what I just said makes sense. Or you're like, wait a minute, it just came out really weird. Like maybe that's not what I want. Maybe that's not where I should be headed. So you almost like clarify to yourself where you should be headed. And that's what coaches do. They provide that safe space for you to think out loud.
Understood. That is great. So when we talk about in today's context, in startups, team members often wear multiple hats and take on diverse tasks. Mainly when a student graduates and joins a startup, they generally feel that they can do everything, every possible work, they can do it, which is great. Like in terms of learning perspective, that is great. But can lead to disorganization. So, in such a case, how companies can align like a business strategy with, the team skills? Yeah, majorly.
Yeah, so that's a tough one, right? I think like every small company I speak with struggles with that, especially once. So you usually have control over your company, so to say, up to like 50 people. After your company hits 50 people plus, that is when it tends to just, this is when it's almost like becomes unmanageable unless you have a very solid structure and processes and systems in place. Up until 50, it usually works quite well for most people, for most companies. Number one is obviously understanding your strategy, right? Like that's what a lot of companies need. A lot of companies have a good strategy, but a lot of companies also don't. So number one, having specific business goals, strategies, and so on. But also a caveat here is that in a startup world and a small company world, sometimes that strategy changes often. And that's just part of the game. Like you can have the best strategy in the world and then something will happen and you got to pivot, you got to like change it. So it does become difficult. But in an ideal world, you want to have a strategy, or at least you want to have a very agile environment where you can adjust to whatever strategy you're putting into place. And the way you do that is by have a very clear understanding of the strengths of your team members, understanding what each team member brings to the table. And that is where it helps to have in a startup environment or small company that's growing, you need to have people that are wearing different hats, meaning you need to have team members that are willing to be as agile as the company needs them to be. So again, going back to ability to manage change, resilience, that kind of like, on it kind of culture. Like you can't go into a small company as a young person or even just an experienced person and expect to have a normal, just like an easy day. It just doesn't work. So companies gotta recruit people that are, and this is where it's difficult, right? You gotta recruit people that have the skills you need, but also people that have the hunger, right? The hunger to grow and the ability to manage change, because change is inevitable. And this happens a lot in startups and just small growing companies. So a lot understanding, number one, strategy, and number two, having the team with the right skill sets, having the right expectations. That's another big thing, right? Like as a leader, setting the right expectations, creating specific set of behaviors that you expect of each team member based on the goals that you have set for them. I think that's a big gap for a lot of companies. Is like, okay, well, do this, but then it's like the directions weren't clear enough or expectations were not set, right? And again, in a startup environment, it's really helpful to be working together in a closed space, like either in person, right? Or if it's virtual, like I do know small companies that are very successful virtually. But again, part of it is also because they are smaller. So they'll have like 10 to 15 team members, which is still manageable, because at that level, you're still recruiting people that are probably all high performers, that are probably all excited about startup world and have that resilience. Once you tip over that 50 people, it's very hard to have more than 50 people of high performers who are all on board and just doing everything, automatically, like understanding how that world works. So, and sometimes it's even, starting earlier, but typically 50 people, this is when you start to get people that are not necessarily high performers. They need that structure, they need that system, they need the expectation set and so on. So other companies that work really well remotely, yes, but usually they are smaller in size. So it's a little bit more manageable. There's like very direct relationships and so on. So yeah, I would say that you also have to invest, of course, in mentoring those people. So as leadership of the small companies, mentorship is essential, and continuous communication and relationship building within the teams, like really knowing your team members and having, it's a tough environment. Building a business is hard, right? It's very hard, and you want to have the right people on the team, but you also want to make sure that you know those people, make sure that you are giving them what they need to be successful as well.
Understood. Also, when we talk about the work patterns has changed a lot. Like earlier, it would be 9 to 5 job. We used to call it a 9 to 5 job, but nowadays, because of the pressure and everything, the standard hours has actually increased a lot. So what do you believe in driving this shift in this work pattern? What's the reason?
Yeah, that's a good question, Nidhi, because it's been an interesting shift. It's really weird because what you hear, and I'm always like, and I always say there's like two sides to this. You hear in the news like, oh, this company has implemented a four-day work week, and people were productive, and everything worked out well, and that's great. And then you see people like, on average, an employee works 45 minutes longer today than they did pre-pandemic, and then you have CEOs of other companies coming out and saying, you can work 4 days a week, but your competition is working 5 days a week, so you're going to be left behind. So there are a lot of, depending on kind of which side you're on, there are a lot of different opinions and shifts when it comes to the way that we work. On average, are we working more? Maybe, yes, depending on some reports, but then also, I always think like there's other reports that are saying people are quiet quitting. Like that was the latest, like really big thing, like the quiet quitting, which is basically people that are just doing the bare minimum, right? So it's like, what's the percentage of people that are working, super hard and long hours versus the percentage of people realistically that are like quiet quitting, right? So I don't know. I don't have the numbers, unfortunately, in front of me, but I think it just depends on the company. I think on average, probably, yes, maybe we'll work more, maybe, but also we're not spending time commuting. We're not spending time, doing all these other things. So, and it's a lot easier to continue to work when you're sitting at home, right? Which is, again, like I'm a fan of in-office work, maybe not every day, but, once a week, twice a week, because it gives you that disconnect. So I struggle with this because I believe also, I forget who said it, the CEO that said like, your competition's working 5 days a week. And I think that's true. And I think companies are, again, it's a very confusing space to be in because it's like we're becoming leaner. Like there's a lot of layoffs that happen, but at the same time, we want to make more money. So people, so you need people to work more, but then you're pushing people to a point of burnout or to a point where they're quiet quitting. So it's an interesting shift to observe. And I think it's probably going to blow up in our faces eventually. I'm in tech and I see a lot of high level of burnout because we're getting leaner, but we're working more. But at the same time, you have other people that are quiet quitting, which means that somebody is taking on their workload. So the quiet quitter, they might be doing the bare minimum, but somebody is picking up their slack, I'm sure, somewhere in a company. And so it becomes unbalanced. So I don't know if, I think some people are working more, but I think other people are working less. I really think so. So just depends.
Yeah. Also, when we talk about work-life balance, so I think the work-life balance and employee well-being. So, what general the actions can, the human resource team and the managers can take to ensure that, team thrives both personally and professionally?
Here I'll split into two categories. One, the individual, and the other one's the organization, because I think it's not fair to only put everything on the organization and on the HR team. I think the individual, it starts with the individual. It starts with their habits and behaviors and lifestyle at home, and then their personal life before HR can do magic, some kind of magic that everybody expects HR to do, right? So on the individual side, it's 3 pieces of well-being that I like to focus on. The physical well-being, which is your overall health. Are you sleeping well? What are you eating? How much you're moving throughout the day? Your emotional/mental well-being, which is how self-aware are you? Do you know how you manage your emotions? Do you know how to handle conflict in a positive way or in a healthy way? Do you know what you want? Do you know why you're doing what you're doing? So having that self-awareness and that understanding of triggers. And then the social well-being, which is having a support network, being around people. These 3 pieces of well-being as an individual, you need to have, do or die, because this is the base of everything. You cannot, if these 3 pieces, if you're sleeping like crap, you're eating like crap, you're not taking care of your body and mind, you don't have anybody, you don't have love and family and joy and friendship around you, and you're not in tune with who you are, what you want out of life, no HR or company is going to save you, right? So individual, it has to start with that, like these 3 pieces. And then for the HR and the companies, it's one, leading by example. So as leadership and managers, leading by example, making sure people are taking time off, making sure people are not sending emails at 8 p.m. or 3 a.m. or whatnot, like making sure, like being attuned to, is somebody overdoing it? Like, is somebody like driving themselves into burnout, which requires a manager to pay attention, right? And to build a relationship with the team members, making sure that they know what, if somebody's struggling, and creating a safe space for somebody to come and say, you know what, Nidhi, like I'm really not at my best today. I need a day off, and so on. And creating systems and processes in place where people are not continuously running themselves into the ground. And that goes from allocating work tasks accordingly, right? Meaning that, like a lot of companies right now are getting leaner, right? So if a person leaves, then whoever stays has to do that person's job too. So like something has to give. So making sure that you're not burning your people to the ground by creating systems and processes that simplify the way we work, that make it more efficient, help people be more productive, and so on, instead of working more and more and more and taking up the slack of people that were left or that were let go. I think that's important. And, and again, providing resources to the staff to make sure that they're managing their well-being accordingly. But it starts with the individual by far. That's where it's at.
That is so true. As my last question, like, where do you find, the future of work? Like, where do you see, like, how the changes, how many changes are still going to be there? Post-pandemic, there has been a lot of changes in the work, work style and, the workspace altogether. So what, like, future of, majorly recruitment or, this workplace looks like?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I don't pretend to predict the future, but I think what I've seen is that talent, I think we need to rethink of how we do talent. I think we're still stuck, and we're going to feel the pain. We're still stuck in the old way of recruiting, which is like, the resume scanning and making sure they tick all the boxes. I think we need to start shifting more and more towards recruiting for the person, like the holistic approach to recruiting, understanding what they bring to the table. I think unless we start investing in our young people, we're going to have a big talent gap. Today, we know that I think males at least in the US, between ages of 18 and 20, 24, maybe even higher, are unemployed because they're not just because they can't find a job, they just don't want to work. So we have a huge gap of young people that are just not wanting to work. They're just not wanting to work. And part of it is because of various social things that are happening, the loneliness problem, a lot of societal changes that are happening around the world. So a lot of mental health challenges, right? So all of that kills the motivation of any person to do anything with their life. And we see this in numbers. This is facts. Like, this is what's happening. A lot of people are just checking out of life, basically. And they're just, choosing to spend their time doing something else and barely surviving on whatever, however they make their money or whoever's supporting them. So I think I don't know if as companies, there's something that we need to focus on. And yes, I'm sure there is, like in terms of like developing specific young talent pipelines. But Nidhi, I think the education system around the world is very much tied to the future of work, because this is where we see the biggest struggle is like the young population coming into the workforce, the gaps in skills that they have, the lack of talent coming out of universities. And just the world, the way we work, right? Like, there's so much technology that's happening, and people are becoming more connected, but yet disconnected. And so that, I think there's a lot of societal things that need to be worked on before we try to fix the world of work, like the future of work, right? And as individuals, I think just staying, as I mentioned, staying curious about how your work and your job is going to be impacted. And your role, I think that's essential. So I don't have any specific predictions. I'm not an expert on future work per se, but I just see how the education system, like the earlier aspect of our youth, that's probably the biggest threat to the future of work.
Yeah. So I think the checks should be like the culture check rather than the skills that the people, the talent people are looking for. It should be rather the checks of the culture part. If that the students or the people who are going to join, like, should be cultural fit rather than the skill fit. So yeah. So anything you wanted to add?
No. I agree. I think it's just maybe finding a nice balance would be great. But to your point, if not the skills, then maybe just looking for that potential versus just skills they bring to the table today.
Yeah. So yeah, Elena, that concludes my side. And thank you so much for giving us the time and joining us to the podcast today. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.